It's Thursday, September 8th, 2016, and this is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, and I am Kenneth Arthur, if I can say my own name. But this is opening night of the 2016 NFL season. The Denver Broncos taking on the Carolina Panthers in a rematch of Super Bowl 50. And this season on Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, you know, I will periodically get together with someone and preview the upcoming game for the Seahawks or talk about last week's game for the Seahawks. And we are going to talk a little bit about the season in general today, as well as, of course, the focus on the Seahawks and the news. Rookie right guard Jermaine Afedi suffering a high ankle sprain in practice on Wednesday, and he will be out a few weeks, according to Ian Rappaport on Twitter. With me to talk about it is Danny Kelly of TheRinger.com. Danny, I'm not entirely familiar with your background. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I used to write about the Seahawks every once in a while. I still write about them sometimes at TheRinger.com. I used to be at a place called FieldGoals.com.
I've heard of The Ringer, but...
Yeah, it's a niche thing, you know, for Seahawks fans.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's good to talk to you again, Kenneth.
Well,
it was weird
on the promotion from Field Goals to The Ringer. I can't imagine that ever happening to anyone. And congrats.
Thank you. It was weird. It was weird. The intro of Seaside Chats. I'm not used to that.
Nobody is. And nobody likes
Field Goals. Yeah, I mean we can still it's good. It's just different.
Yeah, it is.
People don't like change.
It's fine. Yeah, I don't need it to be good necessarily. It was just a shot in the dark. So
I actually like it. I like it. Seaside Chats. Kenneth Arthur. Like fireside chats. Get it?
I get. Yeah, that's true. I didn't think I did. I thought about it for a few minutes.
Okay, that's what you were going for, though, right?
No, I don't know.
Fireside chats with.
I guess I never really thought one-to-one fireside chats to Seaside Chats. I think I was just thinking about Seattle, the Seaside, and what am I doing? You know, talks, Seaside Chats. It is like, I mean, I don't think there is any other types of chats.
This is probably how Field Goals got its name too. It's like, it sounds like Field Goals.
Oh my God, I never put two and two together. I just thought that
names don't matter. It doesn't matter.
Also, like, yeah, I don't know, because I don't even know if it's technically a pun, because like a field goal isn't anything.
No, it's a pun. It's not a very good one.
Well, it's just goals and goals. That's the only pun. I don't even know if it's necessarily a pun. It's just saying it. I don't know. Field goals.
I think you could call it a pun. I don't know. I don't know the definition. I still don't know what a pun is.
You're probably right. The team back at it again. And I know that listeners are freaking out. They're so happy that the team is back at it again. But just a one-time deal, because you are off doing. How are things at the Ringer so far?
They're going well. You know, it's definitely different. Writing mostly features now. And compared to sort of the daily blogging, mostly at SB Nation. So that's a little bit different. There's a lot stronger chain of command, if you will. There, you know, I work with an editor very closely, and obviously, kind of when we were working at Field Goals, it was the Wild West. We kind of just publish what we want, which was, you know, there's pluses and minuses to both of those things. So it's cool getting to work with an editor, because now my writing actually might have fewer, you know, grammatical mistakes and things like that. And obviously, they help me work through some stupid ideas. So yeah, it's good. It's really good. It's been fun.
I live for the grammatical mistakes and the correction emails I get for every small typo. That's what I really live for.
Yeah, it's always fun.
It is, and you know, I take responsibility. I fucked up. I spelled Kristen Michael wrong the other day in a headline. So
well, that's just because we've called him so many different things. Sometimes I think his name is Christian. Yeah. And I don't, it's Kristen, right? Like, is that how you say it?
That's what they said. I think originally when he was drafted, and like, I think there specifically an article or something came out, a tweet specifically about how to say his name, and it is Kristen
but I'm pretty sure I've heard Cable and Carol call him Christian. Not that means anything, you know. Carol always kind of gets guys' names wrong, but
true. I probably pronounce friends' names wrong. Yeah,
you can't even say your own name.
No, I did not say my own name. That is correct. Speaking of Christine Michael, we can transition right into that. You know, the Seahawks, that don't worry. They don't worry too much about, you know, the depth chart that's posted on Seahawks.com or the fantasy teams or the reports. We do know that Thomas Rawls did play in the preseason finale, picking up 2 carries, you know, proving that he's able to suit up and get out there. But with that being said, Christine Michael having a great preseason, you know, making the team outright and really proving that he's the type of player that you wouldn't want to necessarily take the ball out of his hands. And Pete Carroll this week, you know, talking about his usage of running backs at USC and focusing on that rather than his usage of Marshawn Lynch, you know, with Marshawn Lynch being a Hall of Fame level running back and not quite there yet with Thomas Rawls, although most people aren't ready to call Thomas Rawls a Hall of Famer. But I still think it's interesting that being said, it wasn't hard from people to see, I think, that Marshawn Lynch had lost a step last season and Thomas Rawls looked amazing, and that didn't stop Thomas Rawls from getting very few carries while Lynch was healthy. Right. That being said, I think that they are setting up something, you know, to incorporate Christine Michael into the offense. How do you expect the Seahawks to sort of divvy up those carries in week 1 against the Dolphins? And do you think that once Thomas Rawls proves to be healthy, that those carries will start to gravitate towards him going on?
Yeah, to start out, I think that Christine Michael's kind of going to be the guy, and then they'll ease Rawls in. There's no real need to get him going like full bore right away. I think with the ankle injury, they're probably going to kind of play it safe, and Christine Michael's shown that he's, you know, the type of guy that can carry the run game, I think, and or at least in the last part of last year and then early in this preseason, he looks really, really good, really explosive. So I think that they'll feel comfortable going with Christine Michael as kind of their lead back early on. And then it'll probably transition where Rawls becomes the lead guy. There's kind of this feeling that Cable loves Rawls, and I can see that too. Just the style he runs with, kind of like trying to truck people and run them over constantly. Mm-hmm. And then I think Christine Michael kind of could be viewed by them as like the lightning element. So like Rawls is the thunder, Christine Michael's the lightning. He's the kind of guy, and Cable was talking about this the other day. I think he's the kind of guy who tries to make people miss in the open field, whereas Rawls kind of tries to run them over. So it'll be an interesting mix. I think by the mid-season or so, I think it'll probably be Rawls as the lead guy, but I think Christine Michael will still be a part of it. So maybe like, Rawls will get like 60%, like it'll be like a 60-40 split or 70-30 or something like that. But I think they'll both still play. And the moral of the story is probably don't rely on either of them too much for your fantasy football team at this point. I just don't, I don't know how they're going to, break it up. So
what did you think of Alex Collins in the preseason and the reports, sort of about his progression? He was tasked with a very difficult job of taking over as the lead back for a little while during training camp because of injuries to, Thomas Rawls and CJ Procise. And not wanting to, wear down Christine Michael. Alex Collins got a lot of work for a 5th-round rookie in training camp. And then I think in the preseason, was held out a little bit. And then Troymaine Pope obviously was a guy that a lot of fans liked because he did some exciting stuff. What were your ultimate thoughts on Alex Collins and Troymaine Pope?
I liked Pope. I think because Pope looked so good, people were kind of down on Collins, and I think Collins had a couple good runs also. I think they both had a pretty good preseason. I think there was a couple runs where Collins would get stuffed, and you kind of have to wonder, how much that was on the offensive line. But Pope was the kind of guy who's, and this is kind of like the cliche now, but it's like stick your foot in the ground and get north and south. And Collins kind of dances around a little bit. He, obviously we talked about his excellent feet, and the whole river dancing thing or whatever. During the offseason after he was picked, but he, I think he improved as the preseason went on. He started to run a little bit more downhill, and I don't know what went into the decision to keep him over Pope. I think maybe they see him more as like a guy that they can lean on to get more carries. Maybe they don't view Pope as like a heavy carry guy, but that was definitely kind of an interesting training camp battle. I was on the Pope train. Just because He
You could
just
have said Pope Mobile, by the way. Easy.
Oh, that's good. Have you been using that?
I've never heard that used. I think I may have just came up with something.
That's good. I was on the Pope Mobile, but no, it was kind of a bummer that he got cut, but they obviously, I think, see Alex Collins as more of a sustaining back if their first two guys go down or something like that. But yeah. I think they both had good preseason. I don't think that Collins had a bad preseason. I just thought that Pope was more exciting and potentially added more on special teams as a returner. So it was a little bit disappointing to see him get cut and get picked up. But, these are kind of things. These are kind of like running backs are kind of, I mean, not a dime a dozen, but there's a lot of good running backs out there. So we could see Pope get back on the open market at some point,
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, if he, just like Alex Collins, it's not like either one of them was going to see the field unless something bad happens.
Right.
And if in terms of the future, well, Thomas Rawls is pretty young. I don't think that it's going to be I definitely don't think it's going to be an issue. I try to go back in the last four or 5 years and look at the players who were cut in the by teams, mostly during the second round of cuts. The first round of cuts, you're almost never going to find a future star. But in the second round of cuts, I mean, really out of like 600 or so players that were cut, I find maybe 5 or 6 a year that are pretty good players.
Wow.
So really it's just like 1 in 100. I don't have the list in front of me now. I can remember like Kurt Coleman, the safety at Carolina. He was cut a couple years ago. And he had, 7 interceptions or whatever last season. But even he, we don't know for sure. I do think running backs, there's a higher volume of useful running backs that are cut. But that's just the whole point, too, is they're cut. Like there are useful running backs out there that you can find. Let's see. Tremaine Pope, for example, was a guy that was a free agent going into training camp. So
he was just on the street, right?
Yeah, they're there. So he was cut by the Chiefs or whatever in the summer. So I think that they're out there and it'll be okay.
Who was the guy last year that the safety that we cut at some point? The Seahawks cut him and he ended up with the Jets. I'm blanking on his name. He was the USC safety that everyone was real excited about. And
Deion Bailey.
Deion Bailey. And it's funny because like after, everyone's so disappointed. Oh, we lost Bailey. This sucks. I think he actually maybe even played in a couple of games for the Seahawks or at least one. And then, I think right now he's like a free agent. Like he just didn't, he didn't last. So
yeah, people get, attached because they see them personally in certain situations, but you just cannot say one-to-one. Like you can get attached to college players, but most college players will not be good enough to play in the NFL. You can get attached to guys in the preseason, but the preseason is scrimmages put on television. So it's like it's not fair to sit out there and to compare the same thing as opposed to even this week playing in the Miami Dolphins. Like you're getting 4 quarters of Damakun Sue. I can't. I mean, if I can't say my own name, I definitely cannot say that right now.
Damakun.
So and
Sue. At least you're not saying "sa" anymore.
No, I finally corrected that. I'm sure
that was you, right?
Yeah. And the Cameron Wake and the other players, Byron Maxwell, like 4 quarters of that, much different than 1 quarter against the guys that were cut too, like against guys that are right now not on NFL teams. So it's just not the same. And you want to go more with those proven guys, and then certainly not in the case of Alex Collins, who's unproven, but playing, having the successful career that he had at Arkansas, playing against good college teams and having a lot of tape out there and putting out like the sort of physical strengths that he has. I think it was a pretty clear choice once everybody had become healthy. Speaking of healthy and not healthy, I mentioned Afedi in the opening. He could be out, 3-4 weeks. The Seahawks have a bye week in week 5, so maybe he comes back in week 6. Afedi certainly looked like one of the best offensive linemen on the Seahawks. Justin Britt is playing well at center, and Mark Lewinsky maybe playing well at left guard, and everybody was focused on how they could be strong on the interior. Now it seems like perhaps Jamarcus Webb slides inside and plays right guard, which is, if he wasn't going to start at right tackle, then this is what they signed him for, to be a super backup at those positions. Right. And so he comes in. And do you see a significant gap between Jermaine Ifedi and Jamarcus Webb? Do you have any regrets about, for the Seahawks' sake, in terms of the guards that they cut, like Jari Evans? Or do you think it's not going to be that big of a deal?
Yeah, the Jari Evans thing was weird. I think probably the reason they cut him is because he could only play one position, right? And the theory is if you're going to be a backup, you should be able to play several positions, in the case of Webb. So that's, I guess, the consideration. I was kind of bummed when they let Evans go just based on kind of his history, but I don't really know how good he is anymore, and I don't know really how good of a fit he is in the Seahawks scheme. We'll never know, I guess, now, but I was definitely kind of bummed when they cut him. That said, God, this is such a bummer because people finally starting to feel a little bit good about the Seahawks offensive line. And of course, their fucking first round pick got hurt again before. It's like happened 3 times now with Okung early on, never got hurt in a game. He played like 70 college games without getting hurt. And then he's like hurt in his like first couple of weeks with the Seahawks. And that went on for years. And then obviously James Carpenter got hurt and that totally threw off his development. Now Fetty. So it's just like, the Seahawks are snake bitten with their first round draft pick offensive lineman, but I don't know. It's kind of weird being super disappointed after losing a rookie. Obviously there was a lot of high expectations for him, but we haven't even really seen him play really. Right. So to me, it's something that they'll probably be fine. They'll get through it. They've kind of always done this every year. So the panic is very familiar, but I think that, they'll just work to get through it, and they'll have to, but it's like, honestly, the defensive lines that the Seahawks are going to be facing the next couple of weeks, I don't know how they probably wouldn't have looked real good against those guys anyway. So, obviously we've got Sue this week, and then over the next couple of weeks, you got like Aaron Donald and, some of the better defensive lines in the NFL in their first few weeks. So it's
Aaron Donald's going to beat Jermaine Ifedi probably. That's not a slight against Ifedi. Donald is the best,
he beats everybody.
He's the best defensive tackle. It's not like, obviously I think, that they'll be definitely better off than they would have been, say, a year ago. I think that, Jamarcus Webb is certainly proven not to be good enough to be a starter in the NFL. But as far as if you had to go to your backup at that position, a lot of teams probably would be doing worse. Do
we think that's what they're doing then? They're going to put Webb at right guard?
I think that would probably make, that makes sense. I don't want to assume, but I think that would probably make Carroll and Cable more comfortable than Reese Adiyambo, coming out
or moving Britt to right guard, which would be scary.
I don't want to think about that, as far as if with everything is going right with Britt at center, I don't think that they want to start testing him out back at guard where he was terrible.
This is the Seahawks, though. They will do that. You almost have to assume they're going to do that.
Right.
He started fucking Drew Nowak for like 7 games last year.
Right. Plus,
to me, it's probably going to be annoying, whatever they do.
Yeah, I guess that could also depend on how well Joey Hunt is playing, and what they think about the downgrade there from Britt to Hunt. And
sounds like Hunt had a really good preseason too. I didn't, it's hard to study offensive line when there's no all 22.
Right.
Just you can't really see exactly what they're doing. Plus, again, it's like third stringer, so it's tough to know. Sounds like he had a pretty good preseason though, right?
He won a job.
That's true. Yeah,
there's something to that. With Patrick Lewis, he won a job over Patrick Lewis. So
they must hate that guy.
I don't know. I did think about it too. It's like they got, Patrick Lewis, they did have a really good second half of the season offensively, but they also, got pretty well destroyed offensively in the 2 playoff games, in that for the first 6 quarters of the playoffs, the offense didn't do jack shit. They scored 10 points or whatever. And, I think that, Patrick Lewis clearly just probably didn't stand a chance against, and not that a lot of people do, but against, Kawan Short and those types of players. And you're facing Aaron Donald, and twice a year, maybe they just felt like they needed someone with more upside, and that Patrick Lewis has done all that he could do. Certainly Justin Britt, having never played center, and Joey Hunt being a rookie, have more upside naturally than a guy who's been on the team for a couple years. So there's something I did find it interesting. Like, I didn't even, that Texas A&M has had so many players.
That tweet was really interesting that you sent out.
Yeah, they had, but that Texas A&M offensive line with Afady and Patrick Lewis and Jake Matthews and Luke Jokel.
Wasn't Ogbui on that too?
Yeah, and Cedric Ogbui.
They've had
that's how I'm going to say
four first rounders.
Yeah,
and then Patrick Lewis.
Yeah, I don't know if they all started at the same time, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's like, I mean, that's pretty crazy.
And then you got, that whole team. They had Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans and Kristen Michael.
Oh man,
it's pretty wild.
A lot of talent on that team.
Yeah, pretty wild. The Seahawks taking on the Dolphins this week. Obviously, we're talking about being able to block elite defensive tackles and defensive linemen. The Dolphins have Sue. They have Cameron Wake. They have Mario Williams. They're going to be pushing hard on the front of the offensive line for the Seattle Seahawks. What are your main concerns? Obviously, defensive line versus offensive line is going to be a main concern. What do you think the Seahawks, what do you think is their biggest advantage to take advantage of, and the biggest concern that you have?
I think the biggest advantage is they're going to be starting a rookie at corner. They got Xavier Howard starting opposite Byron Maxwell. I think the Maxwell thing is going to be really interesting, right? Because he was, basically terrible last year. I think he got a little bit better as the year went on, but he was essentially just terrible. And there's obviously kind of the advantage that he's played against the Seahawks. He's practiced against these guys for years, not Lockett, but just some of the, obviously Baldwin and Curse. So he knows the Seahawks passing game. He knows Russell Wilson. So there's a kind of, I don't know if that's an advantage or not, but it's definitely a familiarity. But on the other side, you got a rookie starting. So I think that's the guy you're going to attack. And I don't know, I think outside their front four, their defensive line, I don't think they're super talented defense. So you gotta get the ball out quickly, and that's what they did last season during the second half of the year, and that's kind of the key. So again, it's basically on Russell Wilson to get rid of the ball quickly, because I think the offensive line is gonna give up some pressure pretty frequently in this game, and so yeah, it's gonna come down to the quick passing game. They're probably going to spread the ball out, spread their formations out, get empty sets pretty frequently. And then run the ball. Hopefully, obviously the best cure for a good pass rush is just to run the ball at it. So hopefully they can get something going in the run game.
You're now an expert on the entire NFL, not just the Seahawks. And that's your job.
Officially, yeah.
What do you think about the Miami Dolphins? What's your season prediction for the Dolphins? They were not very good last year.
Yeah.
They constantly seem to be, a team that's, on the rise. They constantly seem to be that team that's, coming up. And I believe that for The Ringer, you wrote about Ryan Tannehill and Adam Gase this week, premiering today on The Ringer. What did you say sort of about, what would be your elevator pitch about your article about Ryan Tannehill, and what do you think of the Dolphins?
I think that Gase is going to be really good for Ryan Tannehill, and because he just has a really logical offense based on, making the quarterback comfortable. I feel like so many teams try and fit a square peg into a round hole in terms of what they're doing with their quarterback. He really kind of adapts the offense to what he's got with his with his quarterback. And I mean, we saw that with what he did with Jay Cutler last year. I mean, you made Cutler, who's one of the most erratic quarterbacks in the NFL, like pretty consistent. And so I think it's going to be a big deal for Ryan Tannehill this year. He's kind of doing the Alex Smith start to a career. He's the 8th overall pick. They've already had. So he's been in the NFL for 4 years. He's already had 3 coordinators, 2 head coaches, or he's on his 3rd head coach now, his 3rd GM. So there's just been so much freaking turnover in Miami and he's like on his 3rd offense. So it's just been, I think it's just, they've been like I said in the article, they've been a kind of a case study on how to like not develop a quarterback. So I've never been like a huge fan of Tannehill. I don't like have, super high opinion of him, as a quarterback, but I do think that Gase is going to be really good for him. And I could see kind of like a jump this year from him. He could start to be in the conversation as sort of one of the top tier quarterbacks finally. He's got the physical skill set for it, and he's got a good arm. He's athletic, but it's just a matter of finally giving him some, continuity and giving him like a logical offense.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading an article I wrote before the draft in 2012, and spoke. And the Seahawks were drafting 12th, and spoke a lot about Ryan Tannehill and whether or not the Seahawks would draft him. It was funny because I went back and it was, somewhat prophetic, and they're just sort of talking about how they could draft a quarterback. Doesn't matter that they had just signed Matt Flynn, that they could definitely still draft a quarterback, and that they want to take as many shots at finding a quarterback as they could. I wrote that Tannehill I thought was, a really good athlete and could be a really good football player. The Dolphins obviously took him at 8, and I think there was a lot of projections at the time that the Dolphins would take him at 8. Mm-hmm. And I still, and I also wrote that, that just because the Seahawks, there was a good chance that they wouldn't draft their best player. The first player they take wouldn't be the best player that they took. And they did take Russell Wilson. Their third pick was Russell Wilson, and they did take a quarterback. And I think Tannehill, to be fair to his detractors, and I think I do fall in the category at this point. That's not something that I was as prophetic about. Is I don't necessarily buy into Ryan Tannehill. This is a guy that last year he sort of quietly fades into the background of quarterbacks, and nobody really
he does
says a lot of negative things about him because he did throw for 4,200 yards last year, 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He seems like a perfectly average quarterback who is, now 28 years old. And you'd think like, okay, he could hit his 30s and be really good. This is a guy that, has consistently been, at a passer rating, around 90 in the last couple years. His passer rating is 85 for the year. I mean, to me, there's a lot of like his numbers aren't, totally different than say Andrew Luck's. And I think that there's plenty to like there from that perspective. But you look at Football Outsiders, and he is the replacement quarterback. He is, 28th in DYAR. Basically, that means that right now he has 20 DYAR, which basically puts him 20 yards above a replacement for the season. And, compared to the top 5 of Carson Palmer, Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, Andy Dalton, Ben Roethlisberger. Ryan Tannehill was 32nd in QBR. He's 27th in DVOA. By all accounts, if Ryan Tannehill, if he was not a guy drafted to be a franchise quarterback, if he hadn't signed a big contract, if he wasn't this young, good-looking, athletic, guy who did throw more touchdowns than interceptions every year, this is a guy that I think would be benched on, he'd be the quintessential guy that you would bench. And they went into last season. It's always like something where it's like, I think they went into last season looking at, the team and saying, look, we have added Kenny Stills. We have drafted Devontae Parker. We have added Cameron Jordan. We've got this offensive line now with Jawant James and Brandon Albert. And we've got this running back, Lamar Miller. And there were so many things. Jarvis Landry had one of the, he had 110 catches. He's a good receiver. Rashard Matthews, one of the most underrated receivers. They lost him, but you look back and you say, screw that. Tannehill has plenty to work with. To me, that's plenty to work with. And you can mention there was things going against him. The fact that they did, fire Joe Philbin after, 4 games. They had 2 offensive coordinators. There's a lot to take in there. But Tannehill, as far as being a franchise quarterback or a guy that I would, necessarily consider, I don't know. He's not someone I would necessarily bank on being a starting quarterback for the Dolphins in 2 years. Right. To me, he's still got plenty to prove. If you had to take a guess, I mean, what would you expect the opinion of Ryan Tannehill would be after the year, after playing with Adam Gase for a year and having what he has now? What would be your expectations of the opinion of Tannehill a year from now?
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much kind of what my article says. So thank you for the good tease on that. Basically, yeah, because like last year's completion percentage was 21st in the NFL. His touchdowns number was 24th. His rating was 22nd. He's like, I mean, like a little bit below average, like at best, right? And so, yeah, that's exactly right. He had, I do think, and I'm just kind of putting my faith in Gase on this one, because I do think he's a really good play caller. I mean, there's guys that are like smart, and there's guys that are good coaches and all that, but I think there's fewer really good play callers, like like instinctive play callers, and I think he's one of them. So I'm kind of putting my faith in Gase on this one, but I do think after the year we're going to have a better opinion of Tannehill. Obviously I could be totally wrong on that, and he could totally flop again. And he's learning again, like he said, he's learning his third offense in his fifth season. So, he could just not pick it up. It could not work. But I do think this is the year where we finally start talking about him like he's a real quarterback. There's been a lot of quarterbacks in the league. I saw an article the other day that have made a big jump after their fourth season. So like in their fifth season, they finally figure it out. There was a pretty long list of guys that have had a big jump in that year. So
I'm excited to find out what Russell Wilson's jump is then.
Right. Yeah, seriously. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't have like, I'm not like putting a bunch of money on Tannehill doing well, but I do think it's interesting. I think
you do have a gambling problem. We should.
We're not supposed to talk about that.
You have all this money on certain players doing well.
Can you actually bet on that?
Sure, probably. No, you can actually. Yeah, I did receive an email from Bovada about betting on player numbers for the season.
Oh yeah, that's right. Over unders and whatnot.
Yeah.
No, but I don't know. I think that he's going to have a better season. That's kind of what my article says. Is he's finally going to kind of what I said is he kind of plateaued in the NFL, and I think he's going to finally kind of break out of that and have a better season.
There's a lot of, it reminds me a lot of Matt Ryan, who's this guy that sort of slides along for a long time. Had a good season where he put up a lot of yards and touchdowns. He had Julio Jones and Roddy White at that time, and just sort of slides along. He's this good-looking quarterback-like looking. He looks like a quarterback that you.
It's amazing how much that matters to people.
And it does. I think you grow up watching. Shane Falco, and it's like you see this quarterbacks that look like quarterbacks, and it's like they're under less scrutiny, I feel like. And you look back at Matt Ryan, and here's a guy that was drafted third overall to be a franchise quarterback. He puts up more touchdowns than interceptions every year, and he sort of slides along with being like, this is the guy that we're going to stick to. And yet, you look at it now, that worked for them. Ryan Tannehill is going into his age 28 season. After Matt Ryan, when he was going into his age 28 season, he just led the league in completion percentage back in 2012. 32 touchdowns was a career high. 99 rating was a career high. And you look at what he's done over the last 3 seasons. His passer rating is down to 90.8 over the last 3 seasons. Last year, he had 21 touchdowns and 16 interceptions, and the Falcons are 18-30. So,
wow.
I think that's the danger for sure. When you look at a guy and you say, well, we're going to hitch our wagon to Ryan Tannehill because he produces a couple more scores than he does turnovers. And I think that's the danger. And there's definitely that point, like you said, guys going into their 5th year. Matt Ryan did have a career year in his 5th year, but years 6, 7, and 8 have been, among his worst, especially given that he's playing with Julio Jones and that he is older. How
old is Russell Wilson? 26?
27.
27? Okay.
And I do want to transition to that. So good job talking about Russell Wilson. He's 27. He turns 28 at the end of November.
Okay, so this is his year. Would this be his age 27 season then, or is age 28?
This will be his age 20. I think that this will be his age 28 season according to Pro Football Reference.
Okay, yeah. It's an interesting. I like looking at. I think that's a cool way to look at how at quarterback based on how old they are, because there's I
think it's fair.
Yeah, I think it works
because even then, if you're counting in development, I think that there's something to be said about when you started developing as a college quarterback, when you started developing as a high school quarterback. And I think that you do have to hit certain things at certain ages. And I think that it's rare that someone bucks the trend. And that's something worth exploring. As far as Russell Wilson goes, this Sports Illustrated article that says that, it talked to an anonymous scout and he said all these things about all these players.
Yeah.
I don't want
Scouts have all kinds of opinions, don't they?
Yeah. I don't know.
This guy's got
it's
opinions.
Interesting because it's like nobody ever talks to. Aren't there any like retired scouts? Like I know like Dan Hatton is someone that's a friend of the show, and I want to see like why isn't there just like a 40-year-old or 50-year-old scout that had been doing it for a long time and was a head scout and got out of the game and is willing to
Daniel Jeremiah is kind of like that.
How long was he a scout for?
No, he wasn't a scout for that long, actually, so it's kind of different.
I want like a career. I want the guy who found the guy. Who's the scout that built the Cowboys in the 80s and 90s? Like,
right. Who's the guy who's the I'm blanking on his name, the Reese's Senior Bowl guy that we've talked to in the past?
Oh yeah, Phil Savage.
Phil Savage is he's a cool guy to talk to.
But it's like,
yeah, you're right. There aren't very many of those.
I want these guys that that are willing to stick their necks out and say things that are like really damning about certain players. Put your, I want to see I want to be able to ask you questions, or I want someone to be able to, and sort of be like, okay, well, this is what you said, and can you just sort of talk a little bit more about this? This is what he said about Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is not an elite quarterback. Pete Carroll has created an environment where he encourages individuals to be themselves and also demands his men to be their best and pay attention to details. If you break down that sentence,
that doesn't tell us anything, by the way.
It doesn't mean anything. Pete Carroll has created an environment where he encourages individuals to be themselves. Well, what does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, that doesn't tell us anything
and
at all.
Also demands his men to be their best. Okay, I would hope that that's the true of every coach, and pays attention to details. Great. It's that setting as well as a great defense. So it's that setting. What is the setting? He has created an environment where he encourages individuals to be themselves and also demands his men to be their best and pay attention to details. And that setting helps Russell Wilson. I realize that there are, poisonous, perhaps, locker rooms in the NFL, but I would say 28 out of 32 have that setting, don't they?
Yeah, and I don't, and I do. Okay, I do think there is. I do think Pete Carroll has a somewhat unique take on allowing players to be themselves. I do think there is something to that.
True.
But I don't think it really matters.
The thing where he doesn't care what you do in the offseason, be it extreme sports or whatever.
I do think there is something to that, but I don't think it matters with Russell Wilson. Like, well, does that atmosphere actually matter with Russell Wilson? Who's
you could say that that the team has gotten better over beginning in 2012, 2013, but the environment has always been the same, and that environment was the home to Matt Hasselbeck and Matt Flynn and Charlie Whitehurst. Well, for short periods of time, like a Brady Quinn or a Matt Leinart, I think got a tryout. The environment has always been the same, and
it's like, are we saying, oh, thank God Russell Wilson can finally be himself? He can come out of his shell.
Yeah, and he had the same environment at at Wisconsin and NC State when he was at NC State, a 3-year starter doing things that school had barely ever seen, and then he goes to Wisconsin and he it's interesting because I also looked at the Wisconsin team around him. Not very many NFL players, other than Travis Frederick, who was a guard, and the other guard Kevin Zeitler. All the other NFL players, the ones that did make it to the NFL, kind of flamed out. His receivers were Jared Abbrederis and Nick Toon, and and the environment itself seemed to. I think Wisconsin didn't do as well after he left, and he comes into Seattle and he sort of just accomplishes it every way along the line. And
he can have the exact same personality anywhere he goes. Right, I guarantee you. So that's kind of why the whole special program thing. I don't really buy that argument because he would be exactly the same person anywhere. And I think putting him in Seahawks system, like he's. I think if you paired him with, let's say he came into the NFL and this might have even been, this probably was the case, or very close to the case. If you had put him in the NFL and he had gotten drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, went with Greg Schiano, maybe Greg Schiano would have
hampered Russell Wilson and been too domineering and,
he's
sort
a Shiano man.
and ruined some of what Russell Wilson brings to it. But I think Russell Wilson, clearly what they liked about Russell Wilson is that he brings so much to the table in terms of preparation, that I think that I think that there are few quarterbacks as transcendent as Russell Wilson. We don't have any proof because he hasn't been on another NFL team, and he probably will never be on another NFL team until his career is winding down. So we don't necessarily have any proof, but, and he's played with the same offensive coordinator for all 4 years. I'm sure we'll see a change there at some point. But overall, it seems like Russell Wilson is a guy that's so sickeningly determined that, like, it wouldn't matter where he goes. He's going to study the fuck out of the playbook and the defenses and just continue to be annoyingly working all the time. So I don't buy that.
I don't see how that helps him, really, honestly. But yeah,
and then he goes back, of course, to the age-old argument, as well as a great defense. That has everything to do with the success of the Seahawks have had over these last few years. The defense, what I think is also interesting about a great defense. It prevents shootouts. So, like, if you had a terrible defense, like a Drew Brees gets to throw the ball 50 times a game if he wants to, and he's going to be constantly backed up. He's going to have more yards to gain because of his bad defense. He's going to be constantly going out there trying to score because of his bad defense. They're going to be behind by 14 points because of his bad defense. If these same scouts or experts had the same opinion of Drew Brees that they do Russell Wilson, and that believing they wanted to start making the case that he was overrated, they would cite his terrible defense, would they not?
Yeah, because it's like volume. Like, his numbers come from volume partly. I think Russell Wilson's numbers would be like he'd have way more touchdowns. He'd probably have more picks too. But I mean, I understand. The one thing I do understand about the defense thing is the field position game. But I mean, the Seahawks, it's I don't know. It's just too simplified. It's too black and white when you say, "Oh, he's only good because of defense." I think that having a good defense is helpful for field position and all that, but
I think that having a great defense is great. It helps with the wins, and then obviously that puts them in more position to, like, sort of be on a national stage. Maybe there's some bitterness to that they feel like that a guy shouldn't get, because quarterbacks are always going to get the most credit, and they don't feel that a third-round pick that everyone said wasn't going to be a starter, including myself when he was coming into the NFL, that they don't want to, sort of start to admit that they were wrong, but also just sort of might be a bitterness of seeing a guy get so much success so soon, and maybe they don't feel like he's earned it or whatever. But I just think, like, as much as you can point to the advantages of a great defense, I think I can just as easily point to some disadvantages, as well as all those advantages to having a terrible defense in terms of, pumping up your numbers. I think Andrew Luck is a guy that benefits from that. I think that allows him to be involved in more shootouts. I think that involves, him throwing downfield more. And even despite all that, he has a great defense. Okay, so he has a great defense that gives him great field position, and he's a game managing quarterback because he doesn't need to, throw it downfield. And yet he led the NFL in long touchdown passes last year. So how does that work? How does it work that a guy with the fewest opportunities because of his great defense to throw downfield is one of the most successful and best downfield passers in the NFL, with the stats to back it up, that he's actually thrown 12 touchdown passes that flew in the air 20 or more yards last season?
Yeah,
that the most in the NFL. That was Russell Wilson. So I'm trying to figure out how the great defense and the great field position, and the fact that he throws it, 500 times a game, which is, or not 500 times a game, but 500 times, less than 500 times per season. His attempts have gone up every year, but last year they were 483. And despite that, he has 34 touchdowns. He had a touchdown percentage of, 7%. His numbers were better than Cam Newton. He has 8.3 yards per attempt last year. His 8.1 yards per attempt since 2012, playing for a great defense, is the most in the NFL. He had the league high 110.1 passer rating last year, and a career rating of 101.8. He's basically Steve Young, but we just don't want to. Nobody wants to acknowledge that. He completed almost 70% of his passes last year, and he made Tyler Lockett, Doug Baldwin, and Jermaine Kearse 3 of the top 5 receivers in DVOA last season, largely because of his accuracy and downfield accuracy. He's not the quarterback that is painted. You could point to the negatives of Russell Wilson's game, and nobody does it. They all point to the same things, which is the defense and Marshawn Lynch, who wasn't around for most of last year, and Pete Carroll, and yet they don't point to the things like the fact that he holds on to the ball for too long. He takes sacks that he shouldn't take. He has made some bad decisions, and he consistently gets out to bad starts, both in games and in seasons. And there's been plenty of bad games to point to throughout Wilson's career, but everyone points to the same things. Like if you were to take the other side, now that you're an enemy of field goals and you write for the Ringer and you don't care about the Seahawks anymore, what would be your critiques of Russell Wilson?
What would be my critiques? Yeah, he takes too many sacks, but that kind of changed last year when they started to speed up the tempo of their offense and get the ball out quicker. Sometimes it's annoying when he tries to make a play out of nothing. Obviously, that's kind of his game, though. He takes too many sacks when he starts running around, but then at the same time, you're like, he makes these incredible game-changing plays when he runs around too. So it's like, I can't really just be pissed when he has a Houdini, or I can't be pissed when he tries to do a Houdini play and gets sacked, and then at the same time excited when he does a Houdini play and finds Tyler Lockett 30 yards downfield. So I don't know. To me, it's like, yeah, there's things you can nitpick about him, but just trying to say that he's only good because of the defense is just absurd. I was trying to, the whole time that, and you're preaching to the choir, obviously, on your Russell Wilson arguments, I was trying to find the game-winning drive stat. I couldn't find it, but doesn't he lead the NFL in game-winning drives since he came into the league? I think I saw that somewhere. If not, it's like he's up there.
He led the NFL in 2013 and 2014 with 5, and he also had 5 during his rookie year. So
I think he might have the most of any quarterback since he came into the league. But we should probably check that. But anyways, the point is he's led quite a few of those. And so again, it's like, okay, so is that the defense doing that?
I mean, none of these arguments cite any of these, and none of the arguments that are like this ever cite any reasons. They don't talk about that kind of those positives, and they don't sort of explain them in a way that would help us understand what they dislike about Russell Wilson. They just use the same 3 or 4 arguments without going into detail about them, just sort of hoping that everyone will accept a narrative and not sort of ask any further questions. So it obviously doesn't make any sense, and we don't have to get obviously it's kind of fun to get worked up and talk about it.
I can tell you're having fun with this.
It also doesn't matter what a bunch of other people think. That's sort of the lessons I've been trying to teach myself about the internet in general, which is that it doesn't matter what people think. So you just sort of let Russell Wilson go out there and play the game, and let's just see what happens, because I think for the next 10 years he's going to continuously be that Pro Bowl, sometimes All-Pro type quarterback that's going to constantly be in the playoffs. And so that's what really, at the end of the day, that's what matters. I do also just find it interesting that Wilson has had a hand in this too. So right after his sentence where he said that has everything to do with the success the Seahawks have had. It's that setting, as well as a great defense, that has had, quote, everything to do with the success of the Seahawks. Now, this guy starts saying to himself, people are going to call me an idiot because they're going to say that I said Wilson had nothing to do with this. So then he says, don't get me wrong, Wilson had a hand in this too. So he contradicts himself. But then he goes, but he moves the offense because of the scheme. So, Danny, I'm just kind of curious. Well, who are your favorite NFL quarterbacks that don't have a scheme?
Yeah, don't get me. I mean, I know what you're going with. Don't even get me started on the scheme quarterback, because everybody plays in a scheme. Everybody's scheme. If you're a good offensive coordinator, you design your scheme to accentuate the talents of your quarterback. So shut up. It's not a scheme quarterback. That's ridiculous.
You have an interesting, because you do have a lot of, I think, expertise on this sort of thing, and can you sort of explain the difference between, like, in the NFL, where Darrell Bevell has an offense for Russell Wilson, and the Packers, Mike McCarthy has an offense for Aaron Rodgers, and they all sort of work well for those players. What are the differences between, like, that and, say, the spread offense in college, where those guys come up in the NFL and the numbers are dismissive?
Well, there's a lot of, in the NFL, you have to know the language of the playbook. You have to be able to call these plays. You have to be able to change the play at the line of scrimmage without looking to the sideline. That's something that, that the college game doesn't really teach you. Is they're looking over, they're basically, if you're watching the college game, you see them get set, do like the quarterback will lift his leg, and the defense will get set, and then everyone will look over to the sideline, and then the coaches are like, what should we do here? That doesn't happen in the pro game. These guys have to know what the defense is doing, be able to change the play based on trying to attack the advantages that they see in the defense. And so this all happens really, really quickly. So just the mental part of the game is way, way different. And the play calling is in college, it's like a lot of times it's like one word, and in the pros it's like this ridiculous, like, you basically tell it. You have to be able to tell everyone what they're doing in a play call. So you have, like, you set in a play call, a common play call will include the protection, what the receivers are doing, what the tight end does, and what the running back does. Mm-hmm. And so it's like this big long sentence thing that you have to know, like, instantly. So that's the big thing. Mental
and
game.
I think you also wrote recently about the spread offense in the college, and how it could how the NFL could start to sort of take a look at that. And then sort of, what do you expect? Do you have any sort of inclination for this upcoming NFL season? As we've seen with Russell Wilson and Robert Griffin III in 2012, the advantages of a zone read option. Obviously, there's a lot of things that coaches and offense coordinators are keeping in their back pocket until this weekend. Do you have any inclinations, or do you have any suspicions about how the NFL offenses or defenses are starting to lean towards a certain, maybe a change or a new gimmick, or any new sort of things that will be used this year based on the fact that quarterbacks are more athletic, based on sort of the way that teams are using tight ends and safeties?
I don't know. I think we're going to see more teams start to run empty, just because it simplifies the reads for the quarterback. It helps you identify the coverage just based on where the running back, when you send a running back out to the wing, the defense kind of has to tell you, like, if they send a linebacker out there to cover him on the outside, that's probably a man coverage. If they have the cornerback cover him on the outside, that's a zone coverage. And it kind of helps you determine what the defense is, and that helps you at the line of scrimmage. So I think, things like that. I think we're going to continue to see a lot of shotgun. It's slow evolutions. I don't know if there's any one thing I can point to that's, sort of like this big change in the NFL this year. But I do think that teams are starting to adopt sort of the spread style stuff a little bit more. Teams aren't running necessarily spread offenses in the NFL, but they're adopting some of these concepts that help them simplify things for their quarterback, help them identify defenses, spread the defense out a little bit.
We talked about the Seahawks earlier, because this is a Seahawks podcast. Some of my you wrote about safeties as well for the Ringer, and one of my favorite players in the NFL is Deion Buchanan, a former Washington State player who is now basically a money backer or a linebacker / safety for the Arizona Cardinals. The St. Louis Rams have sort of also revolutionized the position in their own way with Mark Barron, finding a way for him to be successful after failing in Tampa Bay. The San Francisco 49ers, I don't know exactly what they're planning or what they're doing, but, they've drafted guys like Jimmy Ward and Jaquiski Tart recently to sort of, that they're these big linebacker, safety, cornerback type guys. And the Seahawks, they brought in Brandon Browner. He didn't make it with the team, but they started to sort of create they talked about the usage of Brandon Browner, and then when he didn't work out, bringing in Dewey McDonald in a trade, and also they have Kelsey McRae and Tyvis Powell. Do you have any sort of suspicions about the ways and how much we might see someone like Kelsey McRae or Dewey McDonald this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the base defense nowadays, and that's kind of what the article is a nickel defense where you have either a cornerback or a safety come out and play in place of a linebacker. And the problem is linebackers, traditional looking linebackers, just can't defend some of these tight ends and slot receivers. Like, and so many teams are running 3 wide sets these days that you have to be able to defend that against the pass. So the reason you're seeing so much nickel is because you have to have guys that can cover. And so these safeties like McRae and Powell, and they had the idea with Browner, is they're big enough and strong enough to stop the run. Like, that's obviously still a factor, but they're able to cover. So like you have to have both. You have to have a guy that can cover. And so you see guys kind of getting smaller as that sort of happens slowly, because these, you don't see any of these 250-pound linebackers anymore, hardly. So the key thing is you have to have guys that can cover. But I know the Seahawks really still feel strongly about run defense, and so that's kind of why I see them going with more safety. That's why they had at one point 7 safeties on the roster, because you have to have guys that can play the run and cover. So as for the actual schemes they're going to use, I don't know, because the Seahawks have been so basic in terms of their schemes. It's always pretty simple, relatively, and then they just kind of want to do what they do and do it really, really well.
Mm-hmm. How often do you think that we may see a lot of times on this season when there's just the 2 traditional linebackers out there, Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright, and then sort of the third guy out there being someone that he was traditionally a safety? I thought it was interesting too that maybe you could teach me, or maybe you're still trying to figure out yourself, but if anything, you would have thought that if they're going to move someone like Dewey McDonald from safety to linebacker, that it would have been on the strong side. Why did they put him on the weak side?
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, it's going to be really, really interesting to see. And I'm still trying to figure out what the Seahawks are planning to do with this. And it's kind of I don't know if the designations really matter that much, honestly, strong side, weak side, safety, or linebacker, because they're all kind of doing the same thing. They're either setting the edge on one side, or they're dropping back into cover, dropping into the flat curl zone. The curl flat zone, sorry. Kind of you'll see Cam Chancellor do it. He's either coming up to stop the run, or if it's a pass, you see him kind of jog back at an angle in a zone coverage. And you see on the other side, we would see Bruce Irvin do the same thing. So I don't know. It's and this is the reason Pete Carroll said this a lot of times with their Sam versus safety, is they're kind of the same body type. With the Sam versus the defensive end, it's the same body type. They're basically asking the guys to do similar things at different positions. And so basically, I don't think the designations matter all that much. It's basically can you tackle and can you cover? Those are the 2 things.
Are you surprised that Mike Morgan won the Sam job? And what do you think that Eric Pinkins could not get down in order to get a job?
Did he? He got beat outside a couple times, didn't he? You just can't give up the outside, and it's for some reason that's really hard for a lot of people, because we saw it kind of a lot. I saw KPL did it quite a few times too. You just can't give up the edge. The idea as the strong side linebacker against the run is to force the running back inside where there's 10 different defenders to come in and kind of swarm tackle you. And when you see a guy get around the edge and kind of run up the sideline, that's the cardinal sin. You just can't do that. And so we saw that happen a couple of times to a different couple of people. And for some reason, the Seahawks backups really struggle with that. And I think the coaches always, stress that. And so I imagine that Morgan probably just did the best job of making sure to set the edge, forcing the run back inside. I don't know if he has any upside over Pinkins in terms of the coverage ability. Probably not. Pinkins, I think, probably a little bit better in coverage. But just in terms of the run defense. I think that was the most important thing. Did Pickens get picked up? Is he on the practice squad?
I think he's a free agent.
Okay. He'll probably be back at some point, honestly. Just basically like their ghost roster, as we call it. I think you'll probably see him on the practice squad at some point.
I would think, the same. But he is available, I believe. So, I think also in terms of the Seahawks, overall this year, sort of, where do you set the bar? From 2012 to 2015, those 4 teams, where do you sort of set the bar for the 2016 Seahawks? Do you think that they look as good as they did in 2013, or sort of are you lowering your expectations?
I don't think it's tough to match the 2013 squad. I wouldn't say that they're at that level. I do think they're probably the most talented that they have been since that team, but how close they are to that, I don't know. It is a little concerning that they have 15 rookies on the team. I think that makes you worry a little bit about the depth. Obviously, they're not asking too many of these guys to start, but like we saw with the Fetty thing, now, you kind of wonder about the depth, because right now it's like either Webb, who I think they wanted to be a tackle, or Risa Diambo, who has looked pretty bad in the preseason as a rookie. So I do think this is a super talented team. I think, top to bottom, they're as good as they've been. And especially helpful that Cam Chancellor's not holding out. Jeremy Lane is healthy. On the defensive side of the ball, you got, right now, it's pretty relatively healthy. Their pass rush looks relatively deep. Hopefully Frank Clark will, really show up there. Cassius Marsh looks like he's kind of a serviceable backup in terms of pass rusher. So I don't know. I think it's a pretty talented team. I wouldn't put them up there with the 2013 team, but I think that they're going to be really, really good this year. I still have really high expectations for them.
If you want to do a quick season preview, I did this already on 3000 NFL Mock Draft with Rob Staten. I know that you may have done it on a rival podcast.
What are we talking, predictions?
Yeah, I think I read maybe what you had predicted. You can have
the Hawk Blogger one. No, this I actually did.
Don't say that word around me in this podcast. Did you say field goals when you were on that show? Come on. No,
I actually did one for the Ringer too.
Oh, okay.
Which
I don't know about you, but my predictions are 98% just a gut feeling when I was asked, someone just sort of, when I look at the division and I sort of think about the things that have happened briefly, I go mostly with my gut.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we agreed on a couple things, but what are your predictions in terms of the division winners in the NFC?
In the NFC, I chose the Giants in the East, Packers in the North, Panthers in the South, and Seahawks in the West. And then the wild cards for me were the Lions and Cardinals. Mm-hmm. So the Cardinals would be the 5 seed. The Lions would be the 6 seed.
So I picked the Giants in the East, which was cool because we both did that. And
the East is such a cluster.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter to me who you pick. It's 25, 25, 25, 25.
Right. Exactly. You could argue for any of them.
I picked the Packers in the North. I picked the Seahawks in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my sleeper team of 2016. I picked the Saints in the South.
Oh, their defense better figure some shit out. But yeah.
Well, I'll say this. They had the worst defense in NFL history last year.
Right.
And they went 7-9. So
right, that's a good point.
If they have an okay defense, if they have a 20th best defense in the NFL, I think they could definitely, go 10-6 or 11-5.
I like it.
I think it's smart to pick quarterbacks, and Drew Brees is arguably the best quarterback in the NFL. So I think when you look at it and you can say okay, this is a team now that Brandon Cooks is going into. He's only 23. I think Willie Snead is a nice young player. Michael Thomas, their rookie receiver, has been playing really well. And I think on defense they've added a couple players at least that could make. And they know what they fucked up on so much last year. They might not be able to just straight up turn it around. But
they got a new defensive coordinator too, right?
Yeah.
Or at least Rob Ryan's not there anymore.
The defensive coordinator is Dennis Allen. So,
oh, interesting. Yeah,
former head coach of the Raiders, Dennis Allen. He was with the Saints last year, and now he's been promoted to defensive coordinator. And I think that there's something to be said for knowing how bad you were, and then sort of maybe improving a little bit. So,
that's an interesting one. I like it. That's interesting. You are right that. I mean, somehow they managed to win 7 games with literally the worst defense ever.
Yeah. You would think that for a normal team, you think that'd be 1 or 2 wins, maybe.
Right.
So I think that Carolina is vulnerable, and I think that they're going to experience a tougher season than most people expect. But I right now, just to be safe, I still have Carolina and Arizona as my wild cards. But I would not be surprised to see the Panthers miss the playoffs. And I know a lot of people probably vehemently disagree with that, but I'm sticking to it because,
stick to your guns.
I think that you can look at some of their players last year, and you can look at the loss of Josh Norman. You can see a couple guys had career years like Kurt Coleman mentioned earlier. They have really bad, really unproven, untested cornerbacks.
Yep. And, starting 2 rookies, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So that's
obviously Kawan Short and Star Latulele and Luke Kuechly, and Thomas Davis. They've got a lot of talented players, but I think that there's vulnerabilities there. I think there's vulnerabilities at running back.
I mean, remember what the Seahawks
on the offensive line.
Remember how bad the Seahawks defense looked with 1 weak link at corner last year?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's interesting for sure. They're gonna have to get home fast with that pass rush, or they could be pretty. They could get chewed up in the secondary. It'll be really interesting. I'm not saying they're not going to make the playoffs, but I don't see them going 15-1 and being quite as dominant as they were last year. That was a pretty high bar.
In the AFC, what do you got?
I got the Patriots in the East, the Bengals in the North, the Texans in the South, and the Raiders in the West. And I had the Chiefs and Steelers as my wild card teams.
Interesting.
Steelers is my 5 seed, Chiefs my 6 seed.
Okay. I got the Patriots in the East. I got the Steelers in the North. I got the Texans in the South, and I got the Chiefs in the West.
Mm-hmm.
My wild card teams are the Denver Broncos and the Cincinnati Bengals. So not a lot of changing. I do kind of suspect.
So you're low on the Raiders. You think the Raiders are going to be 3rd in that division?
I think that I want to believe, but I just have a suspicion that the Raiders.
It's a leap of faith.
I think they could be as bad as 4-12. I think that when you look at the whole picture, I was definitely discouraged by the Football Outsiders article on Derek Carr, sort of saying like a lot of some of the things that are being overlooked. Then I think that Amari Cooper, I'd like to see some more consistency there. Yeah, and Michael Crabtree had a resurgence last year. Does that mean he's going to? Is he going to continue that path, or is he going to take a step back? Latavius Murray to me is not like that like quintessential number 1 back.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of his.
And defensively, I love Khalil Mack. I think he could definitely be as valuable as someone like J.J. Watt, but J.J. Watt doesn't make they need more than Texans have proven that they need more than J.J. Watt. And overall defensively, a couple nice additions, but I'm still not there with them. I don't know if I'm right about the Denver Broncos, but
yeah, they're a wild. That's a wild card team. I mean, their year last year was one of the weirdest seasons in NFL history, honestly. Just the way that they won everything. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's something that can continue. Yeah, I'm banking mostly just like on, their defense won't be at the same level, which is why I have them as, a wild card team or whatever. But I think you couldn't really get worse at quarterback. I think that they made with Trevor Siemian, maybe they don't even improve. What did your findings like after you wrote about Trevor? What did you sort of come away ultimately believing in terms of the Denver Broncos starting quarterback? Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of agree with you. It's they set such a low bar that I wrote, it's pretty conceivable that they could actually be better off at quarterback this year. But that being said, the ways that they won games last year was just pretty crazy. With their defense basically winning so many games for them. I don't know if it's necessarily sustainable. So, clearly I have them as third in that division this year. So I'm not super high on them. I don't think Simeon's necessarily the long-term answer. I think he'll be a good stopgap, sort of bridge quarterback, to game manage for a while. I think he does throw a really, he throws a really pretty ball. Like it's a tight spiral. It kind of floats. But that being said, he has like zero experience. His college numbers are pretty terrible. He's not like outstanding in any certain area. So, beating out Mark Sanchez isn't necessarily that big of a feat. So it'll be interesting to see if he ends up being the starter for the whole season or if they bring Paxton Lynch in at some point.
Yeah, I sort of think that they will, and I don't think it'll take that long necessarily. If Simeon, he's got a few weeks, I think, to really, prove himself in that job, and then after that, I think they'll pull him.
They got so many weapons on that team, though. Marius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders.
All those guys were there last year too.
Yeah. So it's like he's in a good situation. They got a good run game, but I still don't think it'll be enough.
Do you think that Brock Osweiler? Have you changed an opinion? I don't know what your opinion necessarily was before, but based on his play in the preseason or reports, and
I didn't really watch him in the preseason, honestly, but I don't have a very high opinion of him. I don't expect a lot from him. I think he'll probably be marginally better than what they had last year, which is not saying a whole lot in terms of the Texans I'm talking about. They had four quarterbacks play for him last year. Hoyer obviously melted down in the playoffs and had like 5 turnovers. And so I think he's not going to be that level bad, but I don't think he's necessarily like an $18 million a year guy or whatever it is they gave him.
How excited are you to watch the Cleveland Browns?
I think that's fun. I think it's going to be kind of fun to watch them. And if they don't get RG3 killed, I think that, there's a pretty good chance they'd be an exciting team to watch. Obviously, once they get Josh Gordon back, they've got some pretty crazy speed at receiver. I still think that RG3 throws a pretty nice deep ball. So there's going to be some – they could be pretty fun. Duke Johnson's a fun player. Obviously it's kind of fun seeing Terrell Pryor at receiver.
Josh Gordon coming back.
And then they got their first-round pick. Corey Coleman is an interesting guy. So I don't know. It's definitely – they're way more interesting this year than they were last year.
Score prediction for the Seahawks and the Dolphins?
Good question. Let's say I think the Seahawks will win. I'm going to say 24-13.
Oh, that's pretty good. That'd be a nice sizable win.
Isn't the spread 10 right now? 10.5? I guess I gave them 11-point win. They cover the spread. 24-13.
Like I said, you're a gambling addict, so I don't know. You know those things. Prediction for the Seahawks 4-game start?
Let's see here. They got the who are their first 4 games?
The Dolphins at the Rams, the 49ers at the Jets.
Let's go 3-1.
Okay,
just to play it safe.
But leaning
there's
the Rams.
There's a pretty good chance they could go 4-0.
Yeah, the Rams and the Jets both provide.
It's just so tough. Sorry to interrupt. So tough to know this early in the season what a team is going to be like. And the Seahawks are notoriously 2-4
last year.
Yeah, they're notorious slow starters too. So it's just tough. I ended up. My guess was the Seahawks are going to be 5-1 in the division, and their loss was going to come to the Cardinals. So, based on that, I think that they'll start 4-0. But they're just slow starters, so it's just kind of
you never know. A 2-0 start would be very beneficial to them, and I think it would say a lot because anything can happen in week 1. Teams aren't prepared for the other teams in the ways that they would like to be at the end of the year. So it's like I think if it's tough always in week 1. So I think if they come out of that week 1 with a win, that's a win. And then I think winning in LA against the Rams would based on their losses to the Rams in recent years would say a lot. So it's like
I would think, and then they're going to go straight into the hosting the 49ers, which, at that point you would think they're going to be 15-point favorites. So, they can start 3-0 and then, have a little bit more comfort than they've had in previous seasons. So, I think that winning these first two for the Seahawks would swing a lot in terms of not just, their own sort of sense of themselves, but just fan comfort. So
yeah. I think I hope this is the year they finally start fast, or at least it even if their record hasn't been terrible to start the season, it just doesn't seem like they're. I mean, I think that's designed clearly, but
it's hard to believe that they started 11-1 in 2013. They really
man, did they? That's crazy. I always forget about that.
Yeah. That was feels like a long time ago, but yeah, they that was the year that they really sort of, and they were winning like sort of games, tough games. They beat the Texans in that game in overtime.
Yeah.
They beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in overtime when they were down, when they fell behind in that game,
21-0.
21-0.
Wow.
But so they were like definitely like those games that they sort of lost last year. Like the ones against the Cincinnati Bengals and the Carolina Panthers, where like they were winning them in 2013. They didn't win them this time. And, I think that having to go on the road in the divisional round and having to play in the wild card round and then having to go on the road in the divisional round, I mean, that's why those games are important, is getting the record necessary to get a home game and a bye week. I mean, the top two seeds, like I think that, past the wild card round, I think that you've got 8 teams left vying for that Super Bowl, and I think that based on the circumstances at that point, that it's really an 8-team race, but you have to get to that thing, and if you've got a home game in that round, that helps a lot. But I think if you can assure yourself the final 8 by winning your division and getting a top 2 seed, that's where it's going to really come in handy. And I think that if I was going to ask you one other thing about this season or whatever, as we start to wrap up the show, Carson Palmer had a really tough playoffs last year. He's looked really bad in the preseason. He is older now, than he has been in the past, which isn't true for everybody. Some people don't get older as they age, but Carson Palmer is getting older as he ages. And what do you think? Like, do you think that, not a lot of people last year going into Peyton Manning season said it was an injury or whatever, that at the end of 2014, Peyton Manning started to struggle a lot through a lot of interceptions. And then he came back to the Denver Broncos and they did win the Super Bowl, but he was horrendous and threw a lot of interceptions, but people dismissed it going into the year. A lot of people did. What do you think of Carson Palmer? Do you think that there is a chance that he is reaching the end of the line, or do you think it's nothing to be concerned about?
I do think there's a chance he never looks the same. But my money would be on him continuing to be good. I don't think he's going to start to suck immediately. It might be tough to kind of match what he did last year, where he literally had like an MVP, caliber performance last year. I'm not expecting that again this year, but I do think he's still going to be pretty good. So obviously the age is the big factor, I think, right? And it's just tough to account for that because the cliff comes out of nowhere. It tends to just all of a sudden happen. So, I don't know. But I would bet, probably, if I was a betting man, I'm not. I would put money on.
You keep on throwing. You're the one that keeps saying, bringing
up right now
addictions.
Are plus 130. No, I don't know. I would probably bet on him having a solid year.
Yeah,
solid to really good year. Not
first in DYAR, first in DVOA, first in QBR. Carson Palmer definitely had the best season of his career. But I think that it is interesting, the fact that at the end of last year, I think he threw 4 interceptions in the last playoff game, 6 interceptions total in the playoffs and 2 playoff games, and all the play during the preseason has been pretty poor out of Carson Palmer. Obviously, I think that we can know this by now, that the Arizona Cardinals are pretty trash without Carson Palmer, going 5-5 without him in 2014, and that was with Drew Stanton and Ryan Lindley. But really, I don't think they definitely, they would be a different team, not one that you would be too concerned about. Like without Carson Palmer, I would probably put them at the same level as the LA Rams. So
you're saying LA. LA Rams.
Is it real? But yeah, definitely he was great last year. So it's not like Peyton Manning, who was, who had actually started out 2014. Again, we forgot, he started out 2014. Manning did as good as ever, and then sort of it just happens with quarterbacks.
Right,
It just
his arm just like fell off.
Yeah. So you just never really know for sure. But that's it for this episode of Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. Danny, so happy to have you back talking football with your best friend in the whole world, me. And I'm sure the listeners were excited.
I like how you put that. Me.
What would you suggest for people who want to find out what's going on with Danny Kelly? How could they find you and stuff like that?
Go to theringer.com. It's an online website, www.theringer.com. Also, you can follow me now at Danny B. Kelly. Danny Kelly was taken. Sorry. And then I don't know if you're on Medium, you can follow me on Medium. I don't know how many people do that, but yeah.
Interesting.
I still don't really know that much about Medium, but you can follow me on there and see all my articles.
The at Danny Kelly, he's got a flag. What is that? British or Australian? Atherstone.
I think he's Scottish or something. I'm not really sure.
Retweet free football tips.
He's talking probably soccer.
He's a sports guy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is the Danny Kelly I'll follow.
Yeah, you should.
Oh, Scotland. At Danny B. Kelly, go to the Ringer. Probably follow Bill Simmons, I guess too. You might as well.
He needs a few more
followers. Great. Is there going to be like a certain day of the week to look for your articles?
No, the plan is, I think right now, to publish 4 times a week, Sunday, and then like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday or something like that. I'm not really sure yet. We need to.
Aren't there? And I don't know if did you mention you're going to be on like? Can people find you like on the radio this year?
Oh, I'm doing a weekly interview or whatever radio hit with Patriots football right now. Hopefully, I'll do a couple more as the year goes on. But yeah, that's basically talking all NFL. So you can still tune into that. We won't be talking about the Patriots the whole time.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thanks, Mr. Kelly, for coming on to my meager little show to talk football and to talk about the Seahawks and preview this upcoming season. And follow me on Twitter at Kenneth Arthur S or at Field Goals. How do you feel, Danny, about someone else telling the world to follow them at Field Goals?
Still feels weird, Kenny. Still feels weird.
That's it for this episode of Seaside Chats. Come by next time into the old beach, I guess, or something. I'm still working on an outro.
Yeah.